How do you go from being an English major to content design lead at one of the world's largest media organizations? Join me today as I speak with someone who's done exactly that. Hi everyone, welcome back to Writers of Silicon Valley. I'm your host, Patrick Stafford. I'm the CEO and co-founder of the UX Content Collective, and got another great interview for you today. It's been a bit of a slow month in content design. It's the summer, so people are on vacation, at least in the Northern Hemisphere. I'm in the Southern Hemisphere, so it's completely cold and freezing. Before we get to the interview today, just a couple of quick housekeeping things. If you like this show, if you don't like this show, I would really appreciate a review. Reviews are the way that people find the show. So if you do like it and you want others to find it, a review would really help. Even if you have critique and you have suggestions to improve the show, I really want honest reviews. So would really encourage you, please, if you could leave a review, I would really appreciate it. You can leave it on Apple or in Spotify or whatever app you're using. Apple and Spotify are the main ones. But yeah, if you could, I'd really appreciate it. The reviews people have given so far have been great. And also, if you have suggestions for the podcast about guests you want to hear from or more topics you want to hear about, I know I've talked a little bit about AI, just me, no AI in today's conversation. I'd love to hear it. So please email me, patrick@uxcontent.com, or you can talk to me on LinkedIn. Yeah, I would really love to hear any suggestions about potential guests or topics. So please get in touch. Would love to hear from you. And yeah, honest reviews are always welcome. And yeah, I do realize we've talked a little bit about AI in the past few weeks. So we'll be veering away from that for the next couple of interviews. Obviously, it's still a huge topic, so it's going to come up, but it has been a bit AI heavy. But today is a bit of an antidote to that type of discussion. So really excited to get into it. Before we get into the interview, just a reminder also, if you are interested in training, any type of education and content, whether that's UX writing, whether that's accessibility or localization, listeners get 20% off UX Content Collective. So please head over there and use the code podcast20 if anything captures your interest. All right, on to today's interview. So today's guest, I've known today's guest for a long time now, about 5 or 6 years. And I can honestly say she is one of the most impressive people that I know. And I don't mean just in content design, I mean in general. She is one of the most hardworking, intelligent, kind, thoughtful people. And I'm impressed with just how much her career has grown. And she is an instructor at the UX Content Collective, but she, more importantly, I think, is the content design lead at Condé Nast, where she looks after brands, including the New Yorker and Vogue, Bon Appetit, a number of other brands there. And today's guest is Sammie Spector. And we today talk about a range of different topics. One is how you go from being an English major to working at a place like Condé Nast, but also how working at somewhere like Condé Nast, which is a media organization, differs from working at somewhere like Netflix or Facebook or Amazon, these traditional tech companies. There are some pretty key differences. And but there are also some similarities as well. So we get into that, and just a really great conversation. And I think for English majors especially, we spend a lot of today talking about why English majors can still have hope, because getting into content design is such an I think underrated and really rewarding and potentially lucrative career path. And so we talk about that journey from English major to content design and UX writing. So if there's an English major in your life, send them today's interview. I think they'd get a lot out of it. Yeah, look, I think that Sammie, who I mentioned is an instructor at the UX Content Collective, is just a really impressive person, and I really hope you get a lot out of today's interview. I think everybody should listen to it. So, of course, I'm biased. Again, thank you very much, hope you enjoy the interview, and I'll talk to you at the end. So, Sammie, you and I have known each other for a while now, and
Forever.
you forever, right? And you work at Vogue, so I feel like, and I haven't really asked you this formally, but I feel like I need to ask you now: is your work exactly like The Devil Wears Prada? And if so, which character are you in this scenario?
Wow, that is a question I've never heard before when I tell people I work
Of
at Vogue.
course, yep,
But I've actually never heard the character question. So that's something, thank you for putting me on the spot. I'd like to say, I would hope I like dressed a little bit better than Andy going into the office for the first time.
sure,
Um,
yep.
what was Emily Blunt's character's name? I would say I want to be more her like confidence and her little friend group in the office is great, but um,
Maybe not as mean,
definitely, yeah, definitely not as mean.
right?
So maybe somewhere where I'm trying to think who are some of the like the quieter character. Definitely not the boyfriend. He's the villain.
He's the
So
villain, sure. Yeah, maybe Stanley Tucci. Get
I was
that sort
thinking
of
Stanley.
vibe going.
Yeah, he like knows his work. He's there. He shows up. But yeah, I don't know. I would say it's very different as a workplace. So difficult to make a
Sure.
parallel, which is for the
Yeah, I
best.
think what's interesting though is that like for a lot of content designers, they will work in an environment like in a traditional tech company or for a company that makes a piece of software or something for a very specific purpose.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's the FANG companies, but even outside of that, there's heaps of different companies and variety different variety of products. But what's interesting about your work is that you're really focused more around like a publication, and then there's content design sort of that comes sort of outside of that. Now in one sense that's no different from like any other type of product, right? It's a product, you're working for it, and you treat it as a product. But I'm wondering, like, what are some of the differences there between maybe that traditional sort of tech software environment where you're focused around that particular type of product and the situation you're in now? Do you feel like it's different, or is it really just the same sort of thing?
Yeah. Absolutely. It's different for a few different reasons. I'd say, especially when it comes to design.
Hmm.
So, all of the product design cycles, ways we do discovery, ways we work with engineers probably mimic exactly what would happen at any other tech department at any other industry. What is interesting for ours, and why I say particularly for product design and content design, is we're not coming into a company that is wholly digital or mainly digital that has a digital presence that needs to be developed, which a lot of content designers find themselves doing, a lot of voice and tone projects, perhaps, like where they really are trying to uplift that voice, make it heard, make it feel like a brand. You might have brand teams working on the same sort of things and working together to like really nail what that product should sound like or what the company should sound like. The publications we work on, so Condé Nast has Vogue, Bon Appetit, Vanity Fair, The New Yorker, just to name a few. They all have really, really strong voices.
Hmm.
We have a already like historic in some cases. Look at Vogue and New Yorker, how long that they've been publishing, over a century for Vogue. They have really, really embedded, entrenched voices that people have known for decades. They've known for intergenerations. We hear a lot when it comes to Vogue. And it's our job, I think, in the design sphere to really be stewards of that voice and that brand identity rather than being on projects that's developing it for the first time. We're really here to actually come in, understand that voice of the brand, make sure we are actually conveying it in the digital product, in the kind of product messaging. Anything we're doing is really an extension of the editorial voice that already exists in some cases for decades upon decades that people recognize and really find interchangeable with the brand itself and its offerings. We have to actually just convey that voice in different ways, whether that's through like interactive products we're building. So a good example is 2 years ago, Vogue did a voting interactive game online for the Met Gala. It was one of my favorite projects to work on. Vogue, like I said, has been around for, like a century and has a really, really strong voice that people know from the magazine, they know from the Met Gala itself, they know from reading online about their favorite topics, whether it's like the runway or celebrities. And it was our job in voting to figure out questions and a way to word those questions that really uphold the values of Vogue's voice, which is all about like celebrating beauty, celebrating femininity and feminism, and always being positive. Like, we're not here to body shame, we're not here to celebrity shame. Like, how do we keep things positive? So, when you're working on something like voting, there might be a negative aspect to it. So that was a big question for the content design aspect of the project and the design itself. Like, how do we design something that like is always kind of giving that thumbs up, that always feels like it's positive, it's not hurting anybody, it's actually for fun and for the love of fashion. So that's one of the, I think, the biggest differences working in media.
It's interesting, the way you describe these voices that have been there for decades, a century even. It's so different to what you hear a lot of content designers saying is they'll come into an organization and there is no voice, or the
Mhm.
voice might be defined by the marketing department, or it's something that's kind of come along almost adjacent to the design of the product, and they kind of have to retrospectively fit in a voice into different areas where it'll fit. I like the way you put it. You're a steward of the voice. Like, it would be almost maybe I won't say a sin necessarily, but it would be certainly be. You can tell me if it's frowned upon, but for you to maybe like change the way Vogue sounds, or to change the way the New Yorker sounds, like, that is so far beyond your responsibility. It's such an interesting shift in how you're working as a content designer, because traditionally for content designers that's their area, and for you that's no, you have to sort of respect it, and it's
Yep.
there and you can't really touch it.
Definitely. But I think we're the most primed to do that, right? So it's different. We're not creating it from scratch, but content designers are really there. They have an ear and an eye for brand voice, for how customers and users and readers respond to that brand voice. So we are perhaps in a really good position to be extremely attention detailed when it comes
Hmm.
to looking out for the signs, understanding the style guides that exist already, trying to figure out how to embody something that's been print heavy and tangible for so long, and make it digital, which is also, I think, in a lot of respects, the work of product designers on our teams too, like to take identity that's been entrenched in print layouts and make it digital. And for us, that's really about like the language that they use. So it exists for years. Like, how do we just extend it further? And that might be creating something new or figuring out a different way to do something. New Yorker, as you can imagine, is quite a different, it's a very unique voice, and it's been around for ages, and it has a very specific way of styling things. We have to be careful sometimes between bridging that gap. Some things look kind
Hmm.
of off online when they're italicized a certain way. Or a great example that we use all of the time is New Yorker uses a hyphen in between e and mail for email. It's an
Hmm.
older way of styling that word, but it's very specific to the New Yorker. We have a lot of different specifics that we feel like they should carry through when it comes to digital product voices, because that really is the embodiment of the New Yorker. And we want it to be a really consistent and holistic user experience, that someone's always feeling they're within that New Yorker space, whether it's online, reading the magazine, on their tote bag, whatever it is. So even in the sign-in flows, we're going to make sure we're using e-mail. You're not going to see that most places anymore on any kind of like app or digital product you're signing into. We've kind of like moved past that a little bit more, I'd say. Um, as you notice, like on different sites, kind of like into a future where it's become like a more common and common word. But the New Yorker is going to keep that. And it actually really adds, I think, to the personality of the brand.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it's I think that more companies and more content design teams could probably take a lesson from that, in that sometimes it doesn't necessarily hurt you to have an interpretation or a way of doing things that's slightly different from everyone else. Just because something is best practice doesn't mean it's necessarily good for your brand. But let's go back a little bit. So I mentioned that you and I have known each other for quite a while now, and I feel like I've been able to see you really flourish in your career, which has been really rewarding to see, and I'm sure rewarding to experience. So how did you get to where you are now? What's your exact job title now?
Right now, I'm leading the content design team. So this past year, I've actually shifted from being a design lead on Vogue, which I can talk about kind of the differences going in between design, like UX design and content design, which is where my roots are. I'm actually back in the UX content design space, leading up our team across brands. So kind of more Condé Nast proper at this point, even though
Mm.
I feel a very, very strong home in my Vogue product design team.
So how did you get there? Where did you begin?
Yeah, that's a great question. It feels like I'll keep it short, the short version.
Sure.
But I started out, of course, not having any idea what UX writing at the time was. So I went to University of Chicago. I was an English major, and I knew I didn't want to be a teacher or a journalist. And that kind of put me in like, I guess I'll either become somebody who works in marketing or at Starbucks. Like there wasn't really a great answer for what I wanted to do. And I was also really interested in art history. And I decided to kind of focus on English and move into more nonfiction classes and more creative writing classes that like centered around arts criticism, which was a great one I took. But there really wasn't like anything that felt like a fit. And as we got closer to graduation, I was thinking, yeah, I have no idea what I want to do. I had taken journalism courses. I worked at the newspaper in college. I loved it, but I knew it was something I wasn't like in love with for doing full time. And I knew obviously about like marketing jobs and creative advertising agencies. So I figured, okay, maybe I'll end up doing something that has more of a creative flair or spin to it, but is tied to business in some way. And then one of my last years, I guess my junior year of college, I took a linguistics class. So one of the best things I think about English majors, probably most places, is that they're pretty cross departmental. There's like a lot of different courses you could take. So I ended up in a linguistics class, and that class was using coding software because linguistics really looks at language at its roots, and it could use coding software in the same way someone in a software engineering 101 course could. So we were doing some like language analysis, looking at text, looking at different things, specifically humor, which was very cool. And through that platform, that software engineering platform, I was able to find internships and got kind of connected to ones that were within the coding sphere, but not related. And of course, that meant UX, which was a term I had never heard of. And it just so happened through like this linguistics program that I found it. But I ended up interning a college internship at Intuit out in Silicon Valley. So that really opened my eyes. I like credit that to everything because it really put students through a UX boot camp, whether they were coming in as like a researcher, software engineer, whatever kind of design intern. They were put through this like a rigorous UX boot camp where you were talking about styles and colors and language and the user, which I had never heard these terms. I was their only and first UX content design intern. First time I had heard that term. I kind of think I might have been one of the first interns in content design ever because I don't meet many other people who were at that time.
That's a privilege. There's a few more now, which is good.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I've hired some interns too, so now it feels like giving back. But at the time, like it was so rare, and I really do feel
Mm.
like I just got lucky to have found it so early. And I was hooked immediately. I really liked that we were solving problems with like critical thinking skills, analysis, where you could apply things like data and what you were hearing from an interview. And it was like very Silicon Valley. So the interviews were like in-house. You could go into a room kind of like, like a police unit where you could like go watch in a room as the interview was conducted in the next room over. Of course, it was much friendlier looking. There were a lot of free snacks, but it gave me that like full Silicon Valley vibe and like really like focused on user centricity and all of these like big foundational terms. And it was like a great way to get hooked. And I went back to Chicago, like loving it. And there were absolutely zero jobs in UX when I returned. So I went into marketing for a little bit to test it out right out of college. It's like, I got to find something. I went into product content strategy, that type of marketing, worked a little bit with support, found my way into content design there, had some great role models and mentors that were helping me apply what I was doing to behavioral science and learn from those behavioral scientists on staff there. That job was in at Morningstar. So it was in fintech. So it did have a design department. I got to work with them and kind of take the two worlds of like what they had in UX and behavioral science, which was like really unique and niche to them, looking at behavioral economics, especially, and habits people had around money. And it just more so solidified my interest in UX as what I wanted to do, and thinking about kind of the psychology of why people make decisions. And I
Mm.
got to continue my learning there, just not with the specific content design title, but really got to focus on a lot of those behavioral topics still, which was great. And that helped me get back into content design proper. And that took me to Condé Nast. So I had actually, I feel like I was thinking about this earlier, Patrick, when I was looking at roles to get back into content design, knowing that was really the space for me. I had met Sophie Tarrant, who is still my manager today, and had just heard her on your podcast. So I knew the name in my head because she had been on Writers of Silicon Valley back in the day,
Yeah.
which is wild. And we still go strong. We still work together, which is amazing. So I met Sophie, ended up working with her. She was UX writer 1 at Condé Nast, and I was UX writer 2. And we've really grown from there, which is wild to think about. And now she is leading UX, and I am trying to fill her very big shoes, heading up our content design team. But it's been a blast ever since. We've worked on really incredible projects. We've really, like, I think, tried to evolve the craft. She's done
Mm.
an incredible job laying the foundation for why content design is so important and valuable. So we don't have to do as much advocacy. I think we're so far past that step at our company that now that we're really looking at like advancing it and taking it to the next level, thinking about like technique and advanced craft and principal like content design roles, things like that, which is a great spot to be in.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a fantastic journey. And if anyone's interested, you can go back to episode 2 and listen to Sophie. Sophie's great. She's fantastic, and it's great you get to work
Tell me
with
about
her.
it.
I think like part of what you've just described is a path that a lot of content designers talk about, where they leave and they kind of think they maybe have like an English degree or a journalism degree or something around that, and they're kind of floating a little bit. They don't really know what they're going to go into. They know that they really enjoy what they do, and they really enjoy things sort of adjacent to English and content and writing and so on, but they don't really have a formal plan. And I think it's really, you just mentioned you were really lucky to get that, early internship. And now that fortunately there's, quite a lot more now. And so there are some more opportunities. But I think it's interesting that still, I think, where we have people doing English degrees and they leave and they don't know that there's an entire field out there that they can go into that will give them interesting work, will pay them pretty decently, and they have some career trajectory. And I wonder if it's because we as content designers haven't done enough to sort of advocate for ourselves to people in university or college or whatever you call it, or whether universities need to be doing more. But I'm always thinking about like how can we go to college students, and thinking back to like when you and I were in college, like how can we go to people there and explain there's a path for you here to get into tech. You don't need to learn to be a coding expert. You don't need to,
Right.
be a data analysis machine. Some of those
Yeah.
skills are good, but you can use your existing skills to get into tech. I don't know how we do that. Can you solve the problem for me right here, right now?
I can't, but I can give you two more problems. I think
Sure.
it makes
Okay.
sense,
Bring
and
them
then
on.
maybe we
Yep.
could like break them down and solve those. I think there's two things here. I do think, to your point, like I don't know how much we are like spreading the good word to university folks, right?
Yeah.
Especially liberal arts degrees. I think liberal arts degrees are now starting to see programs come around media, which is great. It kind of places them outside of what's probably typically going back into academia or journalism or some role in marketing when it comes to English, anthropology, linguistics. Psychology, I think more folks are finding research roles, but for English, we're getting lost somewhere in there. And I think it's
Mm,
because it's routed to really traditional roles often. And I don't
mm,
know how much we're catching people in like the interception before they get into that career path, that it's more and more difficult as the years go by to kind of make that leap backwards, right?
mm,
Uh, it could feel lateral, it could feel like a big investment, it could feel like a risk. So if we catch people a little bit earlier, especially when universities are willing and open to invite liberal arts students into their departments that are more technical and figure out ways to bring in courses like UX, I think that would be huge. We'd catch people where they are. I think the other problem I notice is there's just not many junior roles out there. So I think the
mm,
fear is when we go into universities or when folks write me on LinkedIn and I try to take kind of field any questions that come in, especially from students, we can't really offer them roles because we just don't have that many junior spots, especially in content design. But I see this in design too. We, I think, have been always like the ratio is always so skewed where there's not as many designers as there needs to be. And there's absolutely never as many content designers to support the ratio to product designers. So we're always hiring folks who are further along in their careers that can do more, that can like jump into the
yeah.
company, pick up work and really run with it, which is amazing. It's what we need, but it's what we need in the short term. Long term, we're not training people. And I think that's part of it is sometimes I think there might be a hesitancy to talk to students because you feel like you might be promising or getting somebody's hopes up, but we don't have
Mm,
a role to offer them. But I do still think it's the learning and information that a student needs at that age that's like, even if you can't find a junior UX content design role, go do this. Go try for technical writing. Build up your portfolio through things like UX Content Collective, of course, but through projects that you take on and other roles that you could feed back into UX. You do UX if you're that type of person. And I think there's ways to mentor folks, even if we don't have a job available. But I do think that's an industry problem. We really need to start investing in junior roles. And I think we can look to something like software as an industry, software engineering as an industry to do that, right? They have a ton of internship programs. They go into
mm,
students, they recruit, they have entry level positions that those coders are definitely expected to do less than their remit, but they're expected to grow and we're investing time in those so the industry grows. And I'm not seeing us do that with content design as much. And I think we need to.
yeah. Even just telling people this is an option, like not promising that there's going to be something waiting for you at the end, not saying that you're going to earn, $300,000 straight out of university or whatever, but just saying this is a path you can go down. And I just don't know if where the industry is doing that right now. Now, the past couple of years have been a little bit of a blip in that way because it's been tough for everyone. I feel like we're sort of now returning to some sort of normalcy. But it's and I don't know whether that's through, as you say, like educational programs or just going into universities and letting them know, just basically on a purely practical level, this is something you can do.
Mhm.
I don't really know because I feel like people go to, I mean, the stereotype of the English degree or something like that is that people go in because they don't really know what to do, right? It's like, oh, I'm not good at anything else, so I'll just do this because I love reading or I love
Yeah,
books.
I
It would
am.
be
I
good to
am the poster child for that.
yeah, yeah. That was your experience. You didn't want to
Yeah,
do anything else, yeah.
I loved art and I loved reading. And
Hmm.
with those two skill sets, I think my parents were happier somehow I picked English than art history. And
Yeah,
we were kind of like, okay, well, of these two, like, good luck. And
yeah.
I chose English, and I'm really glad I do, and I did. But there's so many other fields that you get to kind of be a part of, and they're so kind of like academia based, like linguistics, anthropology, art history, and
Yeah.
the rules are so niche, but they all are the same when it comes to like critical thinking, reading, documentation, understanding how to articulate your ideas. And like those
Mm,
liberal arts majors, I think, are really just like a different type of thinking. And that's
mm,
usually perhaps why students find themselves doing them.
mm. What do you think we can do then? Like, I still think like the English degree or the journalism degree is a good foundation for people to get into content design. I've had this conversation before where people say, "Oh, would you think about doing like designing some type of content design degree or UX writing degree?" And to me, like, I don't I mean, it's a possibility, but I think the real foundation that you need before that is stuff that's already being taught well, like English or design or something like that. To me, those are the foundational skills, and UX writing or content design is more of an application of that skill. I don't know if there's room for, like a 3 or 4 year degree for that. I mean, perhaps there is, but I almost want it to be like, I don't want to discourage people from getting an English degree. I want people to go into it and with the view that I'm going to finish this and I'm going to go into UX writing afterward, or content design afterward. To me, that would be like a successful path. But I don't know. Are there alternatives? I don't know.
I think that's a good question. I also don't see a world where we have specialized degrees that are for different disciplines within the world of like product development.
Yeah.
I think that we see a lot of researchers coming from a bunch of different backgrounds, usually psychology, but also English. We see
Mm,
product managers coming from the English field all the time, and content designers. For content design in particular, I think it puts you at a big benefit to having gone through like a really rigorous program when it comes to language and writing.
mm,
That means you're reading a bunch of different ways of writing. You're probably reading about writing. You're probably doing some language composition stuff. You might have taken a copywriting course. You might have a copywriting certificate. I know a handful of folks who have professional writing masters or certificates or degrees coming out of an English major that are really specific to like writing well and language. So I think that's all a huge benefit to the UX writing and content design field that you wouldn't necessarily get by almost limiting the degree. And I think that's the biggest thing about liberal arts majors in general, especially English, is it's all about critical analysis. And at the end of the day, content design and even product management roles are really just about really like solving problems and critical analysis and figuring out the
mm,
best way to make or build something that people will buy, right? Or to
mm,
solve a problem. So to do that, you could specialize in something like taking a copywriting course or an English degree, and that will help you focus or specialize on the writing. You could take a course in psychology or research methodology, and that could get you to a position in user research, and you can continue your understanding there because I do think there's a lot more built out when it comes to research roles. But you could start in a liberal arts role or a psychology major, something like that. Or you could go the other way and take some graphic design courses. You don't have to be an art school student to become a product designer, right? You will need to
mm.
be tech savvy. You'll need to learn Figma, the tool of choice right now, really fluently and be able to have an eye for graphic design. But I think those are things with a liberal arts major you could pick up through other certifications and real world experiences and internships in my case, right? I think
Mm.
it all stems from the rigorous attention to like observing and analysis and articulating your ideas that comes from a degree like English. That's actually what sets you apart and primes you really well for a career in UX, especially content
Yeah.
design.
Sometimes I think if I could go back to myself in uni, what advice would I give myself? And apart from just, appropriate, we're talking about fashion, I would tell myself to get more fashion sense. But I think one of the other things I would tell myself is that a degree is really only just a beginning. It doesn't,
Mhm.
it is not an end goal. It is the first step to doing something. And I wish back then I had put more emphasis on doing creative projects or doing things outside of the degree to really, show my skill or just practice. And I'm wondering if you feel the same way. You mentioned you have interns. I'm wondering what makes a difference from one intern to the next. Do you have people coming in who are spending time outside their degree doing, I don't know if they're doing UX work because they might be very new to it, but are they sort of experimenting and doing things outside of their degree? Do you tend to notice there's people more? What makes an intern really sort of stand out to you?
Yeah, great question. I think if I had to go back, I'd say to myself, don't cut your own bangs. It's never going to end well. Don't mind with me.
I never tried that one, but I was like, I'll take your word for it.
Yikes. Um, that's a great question. I think because we have an understanding that universities perhaps are not making students aware of UX, the
Mm.
applications we receive might be quite a mixed bag. They might be students who are proactively reaching out for any and all internships so they can gain an understanding in something that sounded appealing from a job description. They could be applying to any job because they are in college and they need some money, right? Also very valid.
Yep.
They could also be somebody who is in a human computer interaction degree. That is kind of like, I think HCI is the closest thing we're seeing to any sort of degrees formalized around the like non-coding side of the world, of UX and product building, things like that. And they might know exactly the differences between content design and product design and have something specific in mind. But at the end of the day, they're all students. They might not have the most experience. They're definitely not going to have perhaps the best crafted resume. They're not going to have a ton of portfolio pieces. So I think the best way to think about interns is really, are you seeing someone who has the like requisite professional skills you're looking for the work that you need to do? Would they slot into your team nicely based off of any experience they do have? And then what can you teach them? Like, are they open to learn? Are they curious? Where are their interests lying? If someone is a business marketing major, but all they're talking about is like user experiences, but they don't have the vocabulary to talk about that yet, that is something you can teach. And I do think that
Mm.
as an industry, it is kind of our responsibility to teach at this point, especially when it comes to some of those junior roles, especially if we're not offering entry level. So the best thing we can do is equip students who are interested in that role, no matter if they understand what it's called or not, or have the terminology. If they're able to take some of that perhaps like busy work off our plates, we need to do a fair trade and teach them about a viable industry that they could join as a career path. And that should be part of internships. They should be about learning. We can't expect students to come in with an understanding of like the double diamond, like design process, right? Like they're not
Yeah.
learning it in schools for the most part. So anything they're doing is extracurricular. And I've seen quite a handful of interns who came in from something else and heard about UX and are interested in it. So we had a fabulous intern last summer who came in from a computer science degree. And after doing her first internship during her college years, she learned about UX from her friend in the intern program and thought, wow, your internship sounds so much cooler than mine. She actually went back to college
Mm.
and wanted to switch out of a computer science degree and really was interested in UX and found it same thing by chance. But that's not going to be everybody. I mentor somebody who is a marketing student. She knows she's good at Figma because she's had to use it for a few projects where she's created marketing materials, but she's not in love with advertising. She really likes speaking to users. She really likes connecting and understanding research and thinking about how to make the product better, but she doesn't have the language of UX to do that. And I think she'd make either a great designer or product marketer or a product manager or content designer, but it's not something that
Mm.
she's been taught in her degree. So the best thing somebody can do for her is offer her an internship where she could actually take the experience and understanding she has so far from like marketing science classes and anything else, professional skills wise, that she's picked up from other internships, and say, great, apply all of this like fab knowledge you have to these new working terms and vocabulary and way of thinking that we're going to train you. But
Mm.
that I think is on us more than what we need to look for in an intern. I think we need to look for people who are really ready and willing to learn. And if we're telling them about something, we want to see that they're like enthusiastic and that it's clicking in their heads. And I know what that moment
Mm.
feels like. And I love watching it in students. And then the next part would be figuring out how to get some more entry level roles so they can apply it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I is going to sound very boomer of me, but I look at kids now and they are kids because, I'm old enough to be
We're old.
the parent of some of these kids in uni. I look at them and I think I wish I had it so easy in terms of access to free education. College may be, prohibitively expensive for a lot of people, but compared to when I was in uni, or perhaps even when you were in uni or college, it's my Australianism coming out. I started in 2006, and if I wanted to learn about coding, for instance, there was not a free online course that I could take. There was not a YouTube course where I could go and watch someone teaching me. I would have to, or maybe there was, but they would be expensive and, certainly I would have to sort of curate my own knowledge, and I might have to go and actually take a short course at a university or a community college or something like that. There are now free courses online about
Mhm.
everything you could imagine. And so whenever I speak to younger people, I'm always encouraging them, try stuff out. And if it comes to UX and you're really interested in it, there are plenty of free courses available. Even like Google's, UX certification, I think, is a really interesting one. Just try it out, because there's really there's no, I don't want to say there's no excuses, but there's no barrier to learning what you want to do. If you've got a computer or even a phone, you've got a lot of opportunity. Again, that's the end of my boomer statement. But I think younger people right now have it tough in a lot of ways, but also have a lot of opportunity as well.
Yeah, I think they should be better primed to figure out what they don't know. It's getting in
Mm,
that step of like, hey, have you thought about like Googling this? And I don't know where exactly that insertion point is for us to say like, hey, don't know what you want to do with your career? Like try Googling UX and seeing what comes up. Try
mm,
typing in content design. Like how do we tell people that this is a viable career if they've never heard of it? And I think at least more and more people I'm realizing are definitely since, I got the phone call from Intuit and I was like, what am I like, can you tell me my role title again? Like, I don't really know what to expect, but I guess I'm like writing for websites. That sounds cool. Yeah, I know what QuickBooks is, I guess,
yeah.
so I think now more and more students are getting into it and they're hearing it from either like their major or some sort of program that's focused on media. But I do think that is the responsibility of the university or any sort of program, especially for universities that don't offer anything in, some sort of like HCI or media, to say like, hey, here's like what our career center knows about that's out there. Like, we can give you like a credit for like LinkedIn Learning since we don't offer anything on this, right? Or like go
Mm,
take this Google course. We heard it's really good. We don't cover this, but like Google does, and that's great. Like that's what we recommend if you're interested in this field. I think once somebody knows about it, there's so much out there, and it's kind of like literally opening, the like wardrobe door, right? That like
mm,
they don't know what they don't know, but as soon as they do, I've seen students who are quite crafty, and they've created entire portfolios on projects that their friend's neighbor needed something for their cat adoption website for fostering, and they have made it a full UX project that I'd look at and say, great, you've like handled everything from like approach to data, your own user research, outcomes of how many cats have been adopted. Like you're good, you get it, right? It's
mm,
so on the ground. And that's also why I think like, a course can't teach everything. You're going to have
mm,
experience. And the best thing with UX and most of these like ways that you can find information online is you could do something like the UX daily writing challenge and download a free Figma account and figure out like, okay, like I just need to set some time aside and play around with this. And I think there's so much out there to your point that they can, but they have to first know like this exists, open that wardrobe door. And two, it's a viable career path. I'm not just doing this because it's like some cool like computer thing I'm doing on the
mm,
side. And I think that kind of reinforcement to like committing to it in a way that can cost nothing financially, but would take quite some time to understand and watch some like Figma tutorials, get into the details, will set up a student really well, no matter what their degree is, what their first entry level role is. But we have to get them primed in that way and get them excited, especially if we're not offering entry level roles. They're going to have to come in after some other professional experience and bridge that gap and then learn this on the side. And that's quite a hefty plate for somebody out of college post
mm,
pandemic to be thinking about. And I think we have to make it really enticing that like, hey, put in the work, it's worth it. And you notice with students, I think that all of a sudden get it, or you see them roving around Figma and they're like, this is really cool. I could literally just make something and goof off. And you just see that hobbyist side come out that like, I know I get excited about still when you're kind of just having a cool UX based geeky conversation. And you really tend to see that in students, which is exciting. We just have to remind them like, you could do this for a living. That's awesome.
Yeah. It's
And
not
that's
just a
sometimes
pipe dream. You can do it.
right. And I'm nervous they don't always know that. And that's the case for some of the students, like the marketing student I've spoken with. Like, she just needs to know, like, hey, keep going with Figma. That's so cool that you've learned that. And you could actually, pivot a little bit, but you could bring all of what you've learned in your degree with you.
Absolutely. Well, we've reached the end of our time. It's gone super quickly. But I'm wondering if any English students are watching this and maybe they're thinking, oh, maybe I could get into tech or into content design. What advice would you have for them? You sort of outlined some things already, but what do you want to leave them with to be thinking about?
Read the classics. Don't get caught up on Infinite Jest.
That's really it.
Wow, that's it. That's all I got. It's just like, read the classics. That's what I did, right? And yeah, I would say there's so much English majors could do. I think as soon as they understand or have some semblance of, again, like typing in the word UX, start reading about it, see if it's interesting to you. And I think this is where we'll see kind of like that enthusiasm and curiosity come out. It's a viable career path. Don't follow it if you're not interested in it. If you do think marketing or journalism is a better fit for you, but if there's something you keep coming back to about this, like solving problems, words that feel like jigsaw puzzles to figure out, there's a ton of resources to start looking for and reach out. I think UX content design especially is one of the friendliest communities I've ever been a part of. I think it can be quite insular at times to figure out what it is. It's so niche and it's quite small. You see a lot of the same familiar faces, but those familiar faces are very, very friendly. And I love when students reach out, and I know a handful of folks who do. And I think one of the best things you could do is if you see someone who is teaching a course or speaking about something, or somebody who's working at a company that you're working at or interning at that's in that content design role, even if you're not, reach out to people in the industry and get some firsthand knowledge. They'll share their favorite article with you. They'll share like how they picked up Figma or something like that, what tools they use. Someone will mention the UX Daily Writing Challenge to you at some point if you haven't heard about it already. And that's a great way to kind of practice and apply and figure out your own projects. But just keep talking to people and getting into it, because it becomes such a deep network to really grasp a hold of. And then there's so many different things you can explore, right? Like inclusivity, AI, accessibility, design systems, technical language. There's so much that I think there's so many different avenues to go down, and it can become such a rabbit hole if you let it.
Excellent. Sammie, thank you for joining today. You're the best. It's been awesome watching your career just flourish, and to see that you're doing so well is awesome. So thank you again for this excellent advice, and hopefully we'll have you on again at some point when you're even more famous and successful.
Thanks, Patrick. All right. I guess I will talk to you probably tomorrow about anything
Yes, you will.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you. All right, that was my interview with Sammie Spector. Thank you for listening. Once again, if you have a review that you'd like to leave, please do so. Helps others find the podcast. 20% off UX Content Collective using podcast20. And feel free to get in touch with me, patrick@uxcontent.com. Until next time, take care.